So I don't believe that there's ever been a true example of socialism being in any government, right? They have the title, they have the moniker, but they've never had an opportunity to be a socialist nation without the influence or intrusion of other capitalist nations determined to make sure that those socialist economies fail. Now,
it is clear that the ability of nations to let go of control at the national level, at the governmental level, to let go of control of their economies is a key ingredient, a key link in driving the expansion of economic opportunity, economic growth, and to consequently lift people out of poverty. In effect, the development of free markets is responsible for lifting literally billions of people out of poverty across the world over the past 100 years. I don't think there's any doubt about that. We now know that the more control a government imposes on an economy, the more it limits the ability of individuals to expand their economic horizons and horizons in terms of just personal and human development. Yes, everybody has the right to free association, including unions. It's one of the big reasons why the United States avoided more socialism than was on the railroad tracks coming our way in the early 20th century, the development of unions. I don't like the idea of corporations dominating unions because, as Jasmine points out, there's an independence issue that really gets undermined. It's a recipe for corruption. Not that there isn't enough corruption in both unions and corporations from time to time anyway, but when a corporation dominates and controls a union, I think it's really a recipe for disaster. And there are plenty of circumstances in which workers are significantly better off without unionizing. And we don't want to undermine those opportunities as well. I think that we've discovered that over the last 2 generations in the United States throughout many industries.
That we have a plan. It's on fatsocialist.com that explains our triple bottom line policy. It isn't that hard to say how we are going to make this. Like, I don't want you guys to vote for me with no plan. There is a plan. It's very easy. We have numbers on our website to answer that. Triple bottom line accounting is the plan. Over. I yield.
Mike, do you want to respond to that?
Well, it's not that simple. You can't just impose on a corporation, some sense of this is how I want you to do business. We do need to hold them accountable when they make mistakes, when they impose externalities on their communities. We need to hold them accountable, and the court system is the appropriate way to do that.
Across America to bring Americans clean water. And this plan is not currently available yet, but it will be on fatsocialist.com within the next 3 months, spelling out exactly how we're going to bring you clean water. But a big part of it is available on fatsocialist.com under our Housing for All policy already.
Thank you. So, Mike, the next question is, what is your plan on providing clean water across the United States?
This has become a huge issue, hasn't it? And shame on us as a nation for not recognizing, I would argue, as many as 100 years ago, but absolutely starting 75 years ago, we knew this was going to be a problem out west. Politicians stepped in and took over the processes for allocating water in California and other Western states. And now we see the results of bad public policy. It's really a shame. So the answer, I don't mean to sound glib about this because the answer is difficult without being complicated, if I can draw a distinction between difficult and complicated. The answer is to get government out of it. If we had imposed a market system on the allocation of water back in the 1930s, we wouldn't have the problem we do now, where California, for example, the primary example, has been in the business of overusing too great an allocation of water for now 3 generations of citizens, expanding the populations in certain instances way beyond what they could have been sustained in a rational water allocation system, processes, landscaping, farming have expanded in certain places where they had no business being, but for cheap, unnaturally cheap access to water. And we have abused our water availability to such a point where now we're in real trouble. So we need to impose a market system so that some of these secondary uses of water can be reduced. Subsidizing housing is really bad economics, especially in a country like the United States. That's what leads to overconsumption and shortages in terms of good housing. That's exactly what went wrong with our water policy. We need to get bad public policy out of our housing markets. So much of our housing problems have been caused by bad policy. It's what's led to segregation in terms of wealthy and poor. It's what's led to difficult neighborhoods in terms of crime, concentrations of problematic communities. We have bad housing policy in the United States. And I know that Jasmine has, as I have, we spent years thinking about and worrying about the effects of and the causes of poverty in the United States. And bad housing policy is one of them.
May I respond?
Please.
Okay. Mike, I love that you are an industry professional and that because you are an industry professional, you don't make opinions on things you haven't read. Have you read my housing policy by any chance?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I just heard you say no mortgage, no rent.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. I just wanted to acknowledge and clarify you have not read my policy, so you can't make a critique on it at this time because you haven't had a chance to evaluate it. But luckily,
no, and I won't. I just meant subsidizing housing is a bad idea.
However, I wanted to clarify. Like you said, you have not read it, so you cannot make an evaluation on something you haven't read. Unlike most other
No, but I do know a heck of a lot about subsidizing housing.
I'm sure you do, but you can't even tell me how I'm going to do that, can you? You can't. You haven't read it. So before you say something that you are, because you're right now you're speaking from a place of uninformedness, and we don't want to do that. You're a professional.
No, that's not true. I'm an industry expert on housing policy, and I'm here to tell you, if you subsidize it, you'll screw up the market even worse than it is.
Again, you don't know how I'm going to be doing that, so you have no way to fathom what's happening. You're just speaking from your experience. You have not read it. You don't have any inkling on what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, how I would account for it, anything. You're not even taking into account that I do have an MBA in finance, and it's possible that we're both economic professionals. But all I wanted to say is you haven't read it, and it is usually unsafe to take the opinion of someone commenting on something they have not read. That's it.
Well, does your plan subsidize housing?
No, it doesn't.
Then how do you get rid of rent and mortgages?
You should definitely go read it.
Or you could just tell me.
No. So this is a debate about policy and our plans. All I'm saying is you made a critique and you were not informed. This is not a lecture where I'm coming to educate you. This is a debate. You don't know and you're speaking on something you don't know. That's all.
Well, you're right. So I should limit my comments to
things
what
that
I
you know.
am expert in, and that is subsidizing housing is a really bad idea with bad experiences in the United States and elsewhere, and ruins markets and ruins the lives of people.
And I would just go ahead and end houselessness in America. And you, for anyone that's curious, can go read my plan at fatsocialist.com. Not only do we explain how we end houselessness in the Americas in 90 days, we also explain how we're going to pay for it without raising any of your taxes or adjusting the military spending budget. I yield.
Thank you. Mike?
No, I haven't read Jasmine's plan, but mathematics suggests that you cannot turn water into wine. You cannot provide housing for free to everybody because housing is not free. And subsidizing it is the recipe for disaster in terms of overall housing policy. So it just, it's that sort of thing just doesn't begin to make sense. Homelessness is not at its core a housing policy problem. It's a real people problem. I've worked with homeless for 11 years as a police officer in South Broward County, and I can tell you it's a huge challenge. There is a certain population that does want to get off the streets, and there are good programs in the private sector and public sector. Different communities have different mixes of those that do a good job of getting people into certain types of housing, certain types of jobs, and to help people get on their feet. Then there's another segment of the population that is more difficult to work with, that literally does not want to follow the traditional path of getting off the street. Sometimes there's mental illness involved or substance abuse, and sometimes it's just a matter of people don't want to get off the street. These are huge challenges for us, and I'm a big advocate for the very local programs that are in place, including the private sector programs. The ones that I've worked with in the private sector are excellent and actually much better than public sector programs, which is not to say that there aren't counties across the United States that are doing a good job with this. No, you can't provide services without cost, because services have cost. Jasmine's mentioned a couple of times that she would do things without infringing on the military budget. I hope that she doesn't say that for my benefit. I would love to infringe on the military budget. I wouldn't do it in order to provide free housing for people. I would do it to return funds to taxpayers, but that may come up in the next set of questions.
Thank you.
My pronouns are they, them.
Mike, what is the U.S.'s responsibility in supporting international institutions such as the United Nations, NATO, and the International Criminal Court?
Those are three very disparate examples. Interesting. You should bring them up in one sentence. Legally speaking, we've signed on to NATO. I'm a big advocate of getting out of NATO. I think NATO no longer serves our interests. We could debate all day long whether NATO ever served our interests. But certainly at this point, NATO does not. I would actually argue that we are not undermining our own international interests, but the interests of European nations as well, who need to learn how to step up and provide for their own defense. Ukraine is a perfect example of how we threatened to bring a country into NATO and helped incentivize the invasion of that poor country. We negotiated their reduction in arms, particularly in terms of nuclear warheads, making them vulnerable. We have undermined European nations' expenditures to take care of themselves and discouraged European nations from helping Ukraine in ways that they should be doing instead of pretending that it's our responsibility, which it absolutely is not. In terms of the criminal courts, as a practical matter, as an ethical matter, I think that we should be coordinating with other nations in terms of pursuing international criminals. Absolutely. I don't think that necessarily implies setting up some external international court to do so, right? International crimes are crimes within each nation as well. So any particular nation where a crime has been committed can prosecute a criminal without an external court. And the other one you mentioned was the United Nations, which has, great intentions notwithstanding, has become a bit of a joke, internationally speaking, over the last 20 years. It's a real shame. I kind of missed the seriousness of the United Nations, but it is long gone, and I don't see a reason to keep participating. And we need a more pro-immigration and more pro-immigrant policy. The way we treat people on the way into the United States is truly an embarrassment and unethical at a very fundamental level. We do have a problem at the southern border in terms of onboarding people, right? Yes, I believe the citizens of any nation have the right to vet people as they come in, but this should be no more difficult than vetting people to do anything else in the United States. I mean, we can clear people into the White House in like 45 minutes, but we have this enormous period of time to bring people into the United States more generally. that's just absolute silliness. As everybody knows, I am a big opponent of big government and wasting resources. But this is one of those few places, if we need to surge some attorneys to the border to get them out of messing with the rest of my life, if we need to surge attorneys to the border to help vet people in 45 minutes to get them into the United States where they can become productive citizens, I'm all for it. There is a misperception in the United States that immigration is bad for us. It is so untrue. Immigration is very good for the United States in any number of ways, especially culturally, especially ethically, the way we relate to the rest of the world. But it is also true that people who come to the United States commit fewer crimes, use fewer public resources relative to the taxes they pay than people born in the United States. So even if you were just a cold-hearted economist, you would still want to improve our immigration speed. Yeah, we need a system whereby which we get people into the United States, get them a quick path to citizenship, not this ridiculous decade, some cases decades, long processes to become a citizen. We need to honor the fact that people want to come to the United States for economic reasons, for political reasons, for human development as well as economic development, and not discriminate against people who want to come here for economic reasons, certainly not discriminate based on from where they're coming. There's just absolutely no reason to believe the United States ought to be 300 million people instead of 400 million or 500 million people. We have a great system. We can make changes. Jasmine and I want to make changes in opposite directions, perhaps, but I think that we agree that we've got a great system and we can truly be a beacon of light to the rest of the world, even stronger, letting more people become American citizens. If you believe in our system, if you believe in a largely capitalistic, I personally believe that we need to be more pro-free market. But if you believe in a pluralistic democracy and the protection of individual rights, in some sense, you already are an American. You just haven't checked in yet. We'll leave the light on for you.
So we're going to go ahead and cover your prescriptions 100%.
Obviously, we have to protect intellectual property. I'm in no way an advocate of getting rid of our IP system, because it's what incentivizes the creation of drugs. One of the things that we want to keep in the back of our mind as we talk about reform is that the United States does a better job of any place else in the world in terms of developing drugs. So we don't want to accidentally throw out the baby with the bathwater. But we need to make the markets much more competitive in terms of bringing alternative drugs to the market. We don't want to either ban drugs that worked for a long time just because something new came out, nor do we want to protect for too long a period of time with too broad a patent the monopolistic rights of the developer of a brand new drug. So the answer is to make things much more competitive. One of the ways you do that is to open up our markets to international competition. Another way you do that is to streamline the FDA. Now, the best way to streamline the FDA is to get rid of it completely and allow a private sector organization to step in its place, sort of like United Laboratories, particularly in terms of creating a broad range of different opportunities for different families. I believe that the people who should be making these decisions are the families. I don't believe that one type of education, Jasmine mentioned farming, for example, is necessarily the right solution to everybody. But a family ought to have the ability to choose a particular path for their children. The only way to scrap the system and get the full panoply of opportunities in front of every family is just a complete school choice program. The funds that are raised in the public sector for the education, the primary and secondary education of our children must be available not just to public schools, but to anybody who can put together a credible program and win the support of the families making these decisions. Over time, I do believe that, as Jasmine mentions, that will scrap the entire system, because I think it will, in most cases, be that the public school will not be able to compete with the private school options. And we will, over time, sunset completely the public school system to the dear benefit of our future generations. As you know, as a cop for 11 years, I do not lay all of our props at the feet of the unions that do try their best to represent the narrow interests of police officers. I think they do a crappy job, but we need to get around that. We need to end qualified immunity and do a better job of holding police accountable. We need to impose on police officers requirements to carry private sector liability insurance, just like other high liability industries, most notably doctors, surgeons in particular, so that officers that do a bad job will not only be held accountable, but be priced out of the market. I think the courts need to do a better job of holding police accountable. I understand that courts are going to be deferential to police to a certain extent, but I think that we have gone overboard in that regard, and it is very difficult to hold police accountable in court. And that is not the American way. I believe that we need to make great strides there, and can, beginning with the ending of qualified immunity and the attitude behind it. In terms of criminal justice more generally, I believe we need to end the war on drugs. Beginning, obviously, we need to finish up with the war on weed, but then we need to move to decriminalize other non-addictive drugs and eventually treat even addictive drugs as the health problems they are, and stop criminalizing them, both as an ethical matter and as a practical matter. We have done a rotten job of saving people from the difficulties of drug addiction by criminalizing it. We have not helped ourselves whatsoever.
What we can do is defund police and make the onus on protecting neighborhoods be with the people that live within that zip code, or the district more specifically to speak. Why don't we take that money? We were playing the police officer who didn't live in your neighborhood, who doesn't know those kids, who will not at times of crisis sacrifice for those kids. I use Vivaldi as an example, right? But leave it to the people. So that money can be split up and given to you, the average citizen who agrees to join your neighborhood watch, get actual first responder training, and protect your own neighborhood. You don't need outsiders. You need your neighbors, your community members. If there's an emergency, police don't stop that crime. The person who hears it first is your neighbor. So why don't we empower our neighbors to police ourselves? America can be better than this. We don't need rebranded slave catchers. Put the onus on keeping us safe with our neighbors, our citizenry.
I do believe that we need to, as much as possible, decentralize the control of police officers and make it as local as possible. I wish that local politicians did a better job, but the truth of the matter is they don't, in terms of holding police accountable, which is why I think that we need to invite insurance companies in and the court systems to do a better job of holding people accountable. Yes, absolutely, Jasmine's right. Neighborhood-based, community-based organizations that maintain watches are important partners to police. Unfortunately, defunding police doesn't work. And I'm not suggesting that police officers need more money. I think that they need to be held more accountable. I think that the industry needs to be more like other industries, pay the good ones more and the bad ones less. We could potentially go with fewer officers if you were able to weed out the bad ones, right? So I think defunding is a shorthand for a bad trip. But that doesn't necessarily mean the answer is money. It's not. It's accountability. I do think that local authorities, not only local politicians, local community leaders, and local police officials need to make these decisions. But your question went to making everybody feel safe. As long as we're talking about how people feel and how communities feel, polling data suggests that most people in poverty-stricken neighborhoods want either the same level of policing or greater policing than they have now. So it's not just a matter of, getting the police out and everyone's going to feel safe. That's just not how it works. We need more sophisticated training. Absolutely. So if this program is contributing to that, then it may well be that the local community can support that. One of the things that I've advocated for a long time is local officials, the most local possible, get involved with police training, understand what training the officers go through, not only so that you can be an advocate and more sympathetic for police officers. It's not just about that, but so that local politicians can be involved in making the types of decisions that are so important to community about how police officers are trained. You may well find that some of the training processes that police officers go through are more in the interest of the unions and the officers, not so much the communities. Those are the kinds of conversations that I think are very difficult, but that must be had.
He says poor people do not want police in their neighborhoods. They don't want more. They do not want more police. They want more opportunities and more money in their pockets, not police. They want more jobs, not police. Like, I don't know what study went to that neighborhood and didn't speak to any of the inhabitants, but they want opportunities. They want safety and they want jobs. They do not want more police. That was it.
Well, you're right. They do want more opportunities, but both my personal experience and polling data suggests that poverty-stricken areas want police to be held accountable, or want better trained police, but don't support the reduction of policing. That we live in a fairly post-constitutional nation where the parties are much less interested in adhering to the principles, much less the law of the Constitution, and much more interested in just beating the snot out of the other side. And this is where authoritarianism comes from out of a democracy. It comes from politicians being able to say, you shouldn't fear me, you should give me more power. What you should really fear is that other party coming to power. And I think that this is a real threat to the United States going forward. As much as we're all upset about what happened on January 6th, and we're all unhappy about the things that politicians have said and done recently, I think in the long term, the greatest threat to our democracy is the two-party system that is hell-bent on nothing more than destroying each other and keeping each other out of power, and leaving the Constitution in the rearview mirror in the process of doing so. I'm very pessimistic about the ability of the government to control the economy and not infringe on individual rights. Very pessimistic indeed, not only because of the observation of how governments behave inside the United States, but how they have behaved outside of the United States. I'm a big believer in property rights. I think it's one of the things that drives our economy, both in terms of economic development, in terms of human development, and a big believer that individuals ought to have the right to the product of their own labor. And that is what drives our system and sets the United States apart from the rest of the world. And to the extent to which we enhance the degree of honor that we bring to those systems, the better we'll be going forward in future generations in this country. No question about it. I actually believe that I could throw a baseball out of a window and bump in the head someone who would make a better president than Joe Biden. But having said that, that's just not how our system works. We need the government to change. Jasmine and I agree on that, I think, wholeheartedly. I'm a big believer that you cannot replace government officials, as horrible as they are, with a new batch and expect things to be significantly better. I think that we need to reduce the amount of control that the government has over our lives, both at the federal level and at the state level. I think that the authority of our government needs to be devolved. It needs to be decentralized, pushed down to as local a level as possible, and for the resources at the state and federal levels to be significantly reduced. The deal that we're putting together there, which devolves authority and control to the states, gives states the option to separate themselves from having so much overbearing control imposed on them by the federal government, and let individuals gain more control over their lives, as we believe is the only way to advance our economy and the extent to which we're able to foster human development inside the United States.